Coming up on the program is author and conscientious objector from the Vietnam War, Cary Donham. My guest today is an author and conscientious objector from the Vietnam War. He attended 3 years at West Point Academy, starting in 1967, and he's the author of the book, A Wrinkle in the Long Gray Line. Joining me on the program is Cary Donham. Cary, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and I appreciate your giving me the chance to meet with you here.
Yes, absolutely. Your book's very interesting and tells a story of a unique time in our country's history. The Vietnam War was extremely unpopular, at least with part of the population. As we've seen, you see footage of the time, protests in Washington, D.C. and everything. But your story is very interesting. So let's start from the beginning. Where did you grow up, and how did you get to West Point? It's a pretty prestigious school, right?
It is. Still pretty prestigious. I looked it up, and it's still considered, according to U.S. News and World Report, the 18th most prestigious academic school in the country. I grew up in a town called New Baden, Illinois, about 2.5 hours from Paducah, 35 miles east of St. Louis. I had 2 brothers and a younger sister. My dad was a teacher in the local junior high. And how did I get to West Point? Well, a couple of things.
Sure.
Number one, school teachers didn't make a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
And my mom didn't work outside the home. So finances for going to college were always an issue. West Point, as you say, was very prestigious. My parents and teachers, guidance counselor, all thought that that was something that I had a chance to get in. So I applied to the local congressman. I became a third alternate for a position at the time.
Is that like, you're not expecting to get that, or is third alternate pretty good?
Third alternate, I was hoping to be the one that was named. Third alternate was kind of like, well, close but no cigar.
Right.
And then I was in a French class in high school, my senior year, around April or so. And someone came into the class and said, you have a phone call up in the principal's office. Now, this is a high school where there were 49 people in my high school senior class.
Oh, small school.
A small school, 150 people in the senior high school. So I went up to the principal's office, and it was an officer from West Point who said, you know, I know you're an alternate, but we're expanding the Corps this year, and your scores are good. So we would like to offer you a spot in the class of 1971. So I said, well, let me think about it. And I talked to my parents, and I mean, it didn't take really much. I'd been looking forward to this for years. So it wasn't really a hard decision.
Yeah, what was your draw to West Point specifically, or was there a reason?
Well, aside from the fact that you actually got paid to go to West Point.
Oh, really?
You drew half the pay of a second lieutenant because once you enrolled, you were in the Army.
I gotcha.
So, what drew me? Obviously, the prestige. Second was the draft. Now, back in 1967, the draft was something, once you graduated from high school, every male had to think about. If you enlisted in the Navy or the Air Force, you got somewhat more of a pick, but you had to serve 3 years. If you got drafted, you were in the Army, but it was for 2 years, unless you had a deferment.
And you hoped you had a high number if you got in there.
Well,
right?
this was before the lottery.
Oh, okay.
The lottery didn't happen until 1969.
Gotcha.
So, no, then it was a deferment. The most common one was college, 2S.
And so you could go to college to avoid the war.
Until you finished.
Right.
And so I had been accepted at the University of Illinois. But West Point, if you graduated, you became an officer. My father had been an officer during World War II. He had been a captain in the Army Air Corps.
So there'd been a family line.
There was a family
you serving.
Yes. And I lived near an Air Force base. We had many of our neighbors were military people or people who worked in the at the Air Force base. And I felt that I had the ability to be an officer. So that all drew me to want to apply for West Point.
And you felt a calling to serve because of the family line and your community. Was it just kind of ingrained in you that you were going to do this eventually, right?
Well, it was, given the circumstances,
Yeah.
the Vietnam War, which was at a point where it was slightly, the protests were maybe just beginning in 1967. It was it was pretty much expected that you were going to serve. And this just seemed like the best way for me to use my talents and skills.
Did you think that you wouldn't get sent to the front lines maybe if you got the officer's position, or did any of that factor into your decision?
That didn't really factor in
Okay.
at when I was applying.
Gotcha. So you get to West Point. Tell me what that's like. Can you paint a picture of the daily life and what all that's like at West Point?
Well, let me start with the plebe year. Plebe coming from the Latin plebeian.
Yeah. Going to a big school where all the elites are, right? Yeah.
Well, and at West Point, the freshmen or plebes are the lowest of the low. I think there was a saying that the only thing that that plebes were higher than were the Navy's cats. So let me tell you my first encounter at West Point.
All right.
Right, we walked a bunch of people were walking wearing T-shirts and gray gym shorts. And as you approached you could hear a loud noise, and it got louder and louder as you approached, and then you could see this gray arch, and with walls on either side, and the sound was coming through the arch. So you stand in line, and you. Finally, it's your turn, and you've seen this happen. There's a cadet officer who's wearing a red sash with a red belt, and you say, reporting to the man in the red sash, as ordered, sir. Drop your bags. You're carrying bags. Pick them up. Drop them. Pick them up. And that goes on for a while, and then they send you to get your hair cut off. And it's just pandemonium in the middle of this. It was called Central Area, still is, I suppose. And it's a concrete area with a clock tower in the middle and barracks on 3 sides, kind of yellowish stone. And then on the other end, there was a gray building that kind of, it wasn't exactly a wall, but it filled out the area.
So you were put through like a freshman orientation, so to speak.
Oh, the whole, I would say that was just the first day. And in the book, I talk about what Beast Barracks was like. You had to stand and walk around what they called a brace. And that meant you had to stand with your neck like this if you were outside your room. Or unless you were told you could.
Just to make it uncomfortable for you.
Just to make it uncomfortable. You had to jog. If you were outside, you had to jog from one place to another. You had to memorize a bunch of information and be able to recite it at will.
History of the institution. And
well, not. Some of them were speeches by officers. Things like called the definition of discipline, battalion orders. You had to know how many days there were until the first class, the seniors graduated. You had to know what the movies were.
What was the toughest thing you had to do during that initiation period?
You were constantly had to be ready for an inspection. Your room, everything had to be perfectly in order. You had to have all your shoes spit shined, your belt buckle. You had to have your uniform on right. And if you didn't do that, you got demerits. If you got too many demerits, then you had to spend time on a weekend, what was called walking the area. In this area that I had mentioned earlier, you had to walk. You could walk for 2 or 3 hours, depending on how many, back and forth with a rifle in a full dress uniform. You could get inspected while you were there. So it was, and it took a couple of weeks for me to figure out how to avoid that.
And so you got through all that eventually.
I did get through that.
And then tell me about this pivotal moment where you have the spirit of the bayonet mantra. Can you talk about that and how that changed your experience there?
Sure. It was a standard thing that freshmen had to go through. You're out in the field, someone tells you, what's the spirit of the bayonet? And as you're learning different bayonet maneuvers, you yell, "To kill, sir." I didn't hear you. Say it again. "To kill, sir." Well, I did that as a freshman, and I figured, okay, this is part of it. This is just what you do. You know, it's kind of uncomfortable yelling that something about that what you're doing, and then pretending that you're bayoneting someone. Well, 2 years later, it's the summer after my junior year, and I am a squad leader at this point. And I have 11 young freshmen who are my responsibility. And among the things that I had to do was to teach them bayonet.
The things that you were doing there.
That I had done before. And so I'm up on a stand. It's in the heat. And I have these young men who are looking to me, and I'm telling them, what's the spirit of the bayonet, men?
To kill.
To kill, sir. And it goes on, and I start thinking, wow, what am I doing? What am I doing? This is really not, it hit me a lot harder than it did as a freshman. You know,
being in the leadership role.
Being in the leadership role, and and actually teaching these young men who, as I was, were idealistic, that the idea of a bayonet is to kill. Well, I made it through that, and I went on. Then the next, over the next few months, things started to happen.
Yeah, walk me through it.
One of my high school classmates got killed in Vietnam. The general who was the superintendent of West Point, Samuel Coster, got court-martialed for covering up, being one of the people to cover up the My Lai incident, where a village got massacred, and he got removed. Plus, the publicity about the My Lai came out there, and this is what we're doing in Vietnam. There were demonstrations. About 200 women from Vassar came to West Point on the one of the moratorium days, and it just started to circulate. And I started comparing it with, religious teachings. One of the things I remember is that you had to go to chapel then. You were either
you're going to chapel and learning to kill.
Right. You're either Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish. If you were a Buddhist, which I actually had a roommate who probably was Buddhist. He was from Korean. He was Protestant.
You just didn't. Yeah. You were assigned something, or you didn't count.
Now, one of the humorous things is the nicknames that they had. The Jewish cadets were called ham dodgers.
Oh, because the pork.
And the Catholics were mackerel snappers. And Protestants were hill climbers because the Protestant chapel was up on a hill above the main area of the campus.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, so.
What led to your conscientious objection and the decision to file papers, so to speak?
So I was thinking about this. I was talking about it with my parents. I'm learning. I'm been learning my whole life. Jesus says, "Love your neighbor." Jesus says to be kind to people, to everyone. Everyone's your neighbor, and love your neighbor as yourself, and you're your brother's keeper. So I was trying to reconcile that with what I was learning and with what I would be doing as a soldier. Even if I were in a non-combat role as a soldier, I thought, I'll be taking up somebody else's spot. If I'm in this non-combat role, somebody who might have been in that non-combat role is going to be out on the front lines doing what I don't think I should do. So I finally decided that was the direction I was going to go.
And what was the response you got from the military?
Well, I got in touch with a lawyer, a very fine lawyer named Joan Goldberg from a firm in New York City, sort of a radical law firm. And we put together an application which believe it or not, there is a form, a regulation in the Army that explains what you have to do if you want to be considered a conscientious objector while you are a soldier. So I put that together.
So there's like guidelines for that?
There are.
Okay.
And in the book, I go through that. Then I had to take it to my commanding officer, which was a major in the Army. I handed it to him and said, "Sir, I'm applying for discharge from the Army as a conscientious objector." He was silent. This was right before many of my classmates and what I was supposed to do would be going on a tour of all the Army bases for the summer. So he sent me back to my room. The Army had to do a couple of things. But what was immediately, I found out through the Freedom of Information, was that the Army immediately began planning to get rid of me, to throw me out, in which case I would have gone straight into the Army as a specialist fourth class.
Throw you out of school, and then you're just in
Then you're in the
infantry.
Army
Yeah.
with no. So, there were memos about how, basically, how I don't know who this guy thinks he is, but we don't need him here. And then someone stepped in and basically said, hey, if we're going to do this, this could get publicity, so we better at least create a paper trail. So I went through the steps of having an interview with someone who was supposedly knowledgeable about conscientious objectors, being interviewed by a psychiatrist, and having an interview, or actually a statement from a chaplain that I had been meeting with, Michael Easterling, who was a really fine minister. So in the meantime, the Army assigned me to work in the mailroom.
A task that you or no one would particularly want, right? That's a punishment role.
Well, they thought so.
Okay.
As a cadet, no cadet would ever do this. It was a role that there were a couple enlisted men. But there was a memo that said, hey, it said, make sure you keep Donham away from the new cadets.
Didn't want you talking to them and sharing your story.
Right. Well, it was probably the worst thing the Army could have done, because one of the enlisted men I worked with every day was a grad student. I think he had a master's in history from University of Arizona State, and he absolutely hated the Army, hated the war.
And there's your connection.
And then
right there.
we're talking. Then the other guy was only a couple months from getting out of the Army, and he just wanted to go back to New Jersey, where he was married, and I just want to be done with this. This is so. After we went to court. Well, here, I'll let you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
At some point, the Army turned down my application.
What was the grounds that they claimed that on?
That I lacked the depth of sincerity needed to qualify.
You lack the depth and sincerity. You talked to a chaplain, you said. You had gone through the steps that were outlined in the
Correct.
requirements. How did they get that? What kind of questions did the chaplain ask you?
Well, the chaplain, I had talked to him off and on for a year about this. So
he was well aware that you had reservations.
Yeah, he said I was a man of integrity and sincere. There was an interview with this person who was supposedly knowledgeable, Colonel Gleason, and he was basically out to get me. Now,
So you felt the whole time that they were, the moment you said conscientious objection, you felt that from that moment they were like, okay, we got to take care of this guy and wrap this whole thing up.
I was hopeful. I tend to be an optimist. But we knew that it was risky.
Yeah.
So as it came down to this colonel asked me some questions that were very strange. Do
you remember any of them?
Well, for example, he told me, he wrote in his report that there was a letter that I quoted in my application from Tolstoy, and he said that it wasn't Tolstoy. I had quoted from Henry David Thoreau, and he said that I got that wrong. But the key question was, he said, you submitted your application right after final exams. Why did you do that? I said, well, that's when I finished it. I mean,
He's trying to argue that your grades were not stuff or something, right?
Well, no, he wanted to say that and so then what he said was, well, the fact that he waited until after final exams to submit his application, when he decided in February he was going to be a CO, meant that he was just freeloading. Now, what I had said was that in February or March was the first time I even called a draft counselor to see what I would have to do.
Yeah.
I didn't meet with a lawyer until April. You know, this application took a long time to write.
So you called them to find out what you needed to do step by step?
Yeah.
So you were taking a more, I don't know, rigorous pathway to getting it all. You wanted to cross all your T's and dot all your I's so you didn't have to worry about anything.
Well, so if I had gone in to my commanding officer in February and said, you know, I'm going to apply for discharge as a conscientious objector, and the Army would have looked at it and said, well, wait a minute, we got this regulation. You're supposed to do this, that, and the other thing. You didn't do that.
So no.
See ya.
Yeah, stamp, and then you're done.
And then you're done. You know, so I mean, I knew, and my advice from my lawyer was, you've got to, as you say, dot your I's and cross your T's. So it was very thorough. I answered all the questions. I got letters of from people that I knew.
So word had gotten out that you'd made this application at that point?
No, but I did let some people know. I even got a statement from.
Oh, these were people who were speaking to your character. And
Yeah. Basically, you're right.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No.
And as a matter of fact, in the mail yesterday, I got a letter that I had sent to my high school guidance counselor, asking him to be one of my references. And his daughter said she found this, and he had kept it all these years, so it must have been important to him.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we had to get these letters from people away from West Point. We had to get them to my lawyer. Had to write this, which must have been 10 or 12 single-spaced pages. It had to be typed, which my girlfriend at the time did. And so we submitted it as a package. And the hearing officer didn't take into account any of that.
So he didn't even look at it?
I don't think he did, really. You know, you raise that. He must have looked at it, but it never occurred to him that this would take weeks or months to put together.
Were these kinds of applications pretty rare for the time, for the late 60s and early 70s? Most people probably just dealt with it and went on, which might have led to PTSD and other things from combat if they had objections on it forward.
Oh, for sure, yeah. There were people who did it. At the time, the most well-known was a West Point. There was a young lieutenant who was a West Point grad who was applying for discharge after he had graduated and had served for a year or so. So
he was in Vietnam?
I don't know if he was in Vietnam,
somewhere in service,
but he was in the Army.
Yeah.
And Louis Font. But he was saying he only opposed the war in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was immoral. To be a conscientious objector at the time, the legal standard was you had to oppose all war.
And that was your position?
And that was my position. It is my position.
Can you expand sort of your philosophy on that? What went into your conscientious objection? Just the teachings of Christ and your own religious faith is the main contributor to the reason?
Yes, that's the main thing. That if you look at what Jesus actually taught, I don't see how you square that with being participating in a war. That's my personal belief. Obviously, a lot of people, probably people who are smarter than me, feel differently. but that was how what I believed at the time. And, Chaplain Easterling didn't tell me I was wrong.
Yeah.
He said, if you're going to do this, you have to be absolutely confident that this is what you believe, because you're going to have some tough questions that you're going to have to deal with. So, and I still believe that about war. All you have to do is look around the world and you can see the what seems mostly senselessness.
Yeah. Do you see any war as righteous or worthy?
That's a very hard question, and it's a fair question.
Yeah.
I don't really. You look back, you might say, if I would have been in World War II, I might have felt differently then. I don't, and you never know how you feel in a different, perhaps.
Different context.
If I had been, if I were growing up in Ukraine, I might feel differently. That's a war that just seems senseless. But my personal belief is that I could not be part of an organization that's primary purpose is to kill people.
I understand. Yeah. So tell me about how all of the you end up getting media attention. Where does it go from there? Where does the conscientious objection go? Obviously, you've got to appeal that if it's denied, right?
Correct. So my lawyer, once it was denied, she filed a lawsuit against the Army in federal court in New York City, Southern District of New York. And the type of the case is a habeas corpus case.
Very interesting.
And she explained to me that habeas corpus is Latin for have the body. So I want to have the body out of the Army. Now, you hear it quite a bit these days.
Sure.
In context of people who've been wrongfully detained by ICE. And the lawyers went, you got no business locking this person up. They haven't done anything. So that was how it was styled. And so we were the plaintiffs. There wasn't a trial. It was presented on legal briefs and evidence. And this was at the beginning of August. A young reporter from the New York Times who was watching the court cases picked up on it. And he had an article, August 6th or August 7th of 1970. It was on the front page of the New York Times, right below the fold. West Pointer applies for CO status. And other media picked up on it. The press, then they wanted a press conference.
Because they got to respond now. Yeah.
And not the Army.
Oh.
No, the Army wasn't happy, but the New York media, national media, wanted to hear from me. So I was eligible. Of course, I was at West Point during the week working in the mailroom, but I had the ability to take a weekend leave. I went to the Commandant of Cadets and I said, I would really like to take a weekend leave. This was right after the newspaper article came out. And he said, well, I'm going to tell you what I would tell my own son, who was actually a classmate of mine at West Point at the time. I hear you're talking to some rather unsavory lawyers down in New York.
A little thinly veiled?
Yeah. And I could, I could hook you up with one of our JAG lawyers here, and they would give you some good advice.
So he was helpful.
Yeah. I knew what the JAG lawyers would say. So he said, well, if I grant you this leave and you go to New York, will you wear your uniform? He said, well, unless you order me not to, I will. He said, no, I'm not gonna do that. Mm-hmm. So I went down to New York, and there was a press conference with a bunch of cameras and stuff around a conference room table in a law firm, and they asked me questions for about an hour.
And then you wore your uniform?
And I wore my uniform for that. And it even made so far as an aunt in Danville, Illinois, saw a clip of it. Mm-hmm. It was picked up by the St. Louis media. They came to my parents' house.
So you got, like, people were going to see friends and family over this too. This was like,
yeah.
Well, it was New York Times, right? So that was,
yeah.
Everybody was reading that at one point.
And then I started getting these letters. I even got letters from people who were in Vietnam, soldiers in Vietnam, saying, we agree with you. About 2/3 of the letters that I got, which was, like I said, 70-some, mm-hmm. Were very favorable.
Were there any letters that jumped out at you over all these years later? Anyone that was particularly memorable?
Yeah. There was this guy, I assume it was a guy who sent anonymous letters, but they weren't really letters. They were clippings from the New York Daily News, which was the conservative New York paper. And the guy would scrawl in the margins anti-Semitic comments. Why do you have a Jew to defend you? Because they're the masters of deceit.
Oh, so this was a negative.
Oh yeah. I mean,
you probably got a lot of hate mail too,
I got some. I got about 30 negative, or about 20 negative letters and about 50 positive.
So he had anti-Semitic language all throughout the letters that he.
Well, his was just these clippings, negative clippings about me from the Daily News with anti-Semitic slurs, and that's just something that
That stuck with you.
It has stuck with me, and I still have these letters, but that's just something.
Was there a positive one that you remember as well?
Yeah, glad to see that there are even people at Woohoo who are opposing the war. Mm-hmm.
And tell me, how did that impact you, hearing that all these people were sending letters from Vietnam? I mean, of course, you're going to get some negative, but you had to feel boosted by this too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was really, it really was positive.
Did it strengthen sort of the moral fiber? Like, if you were ever wondering, like, is this the right move or divinely the right move, you were more sure than ever, would you say?
That's a very good question, and I think it did. Mm-hmm. You get people who are going to back you up. I think it does strengthen your resolve. And
you said that you received lack of empathy from a lot of folks inside the Army and in the community, you said, even from when you went home after it was all over. Talk to me about that.
Well, I'll give two things. Uh-huh. One, when I left West Point, finally, after I ended up resigning after the court denied my habeas corpus petition, the first court. So when I had to resign from West Point.
So at that point, you're just out.
I had to meet with the superintendent, mm-hmm. General Knowlton, and he went in and he was yelling at me. I was standing in front of him. He was standing there, all generaled up, and he told me that I disgraced the uniform and dishonored the Corps of Cadets. And I said, no, I started to say, no, it's nothing about the Corps. This is just me. And he, shut up and get out of here. I never want to see you again. That was So
And that was when you resigned from...
that was after I had resigned and was leaving.
How did you keep from getting sent to Vietnam at that point?
Well, I wasn't in the Army yet.
Okay.
It took a little bit. So then at home, there was a person from my church who was the postmaster who just wouldn't talk to my father for a couple of years.
Sins of the son. Eh?
Yeah, yeah. So eventually, the judge denied. He said, you know, if I were the first one to handle this, I would probably grant this application. But since my role is more limited, I'm just here to determine if the Army had a factual basis for denying the application. And I think what they said about the filing for the discharge after final exams was, I think that was enough. Mm-hmm. So,
do you believe him when he says that? When he made that comment to you?
The judge? Oh, do I believe?
When he said that he didn't have that kind of power.
Oh, I think legally, being a lawyer now, I think he was. It was a reasonable decision for him to make at the time. Then, given everything that was going on, after this decision, we didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Then I got orders to go to Fort Campbell.
And then that's okay.
And then I got married because we didn't know what was going to happen at the time. Maybe not my wisest decision, but we did it.
It probably kept you from going to the front lines.
Well, so I had to report to Fort Campbell, and I did that. And I met with this captain who was in charge of the unit I was temporarily assigned to. It was just like a unit that people who were just gotten out of basic training were sent to. And he said, I don't want any problems here. I don't want publicity here. I won't make you carry a gun, and I'll assign you to work for the chaplain as long as you're here.
Wow.
And I called my lawyer, and she said, I agree. If you refuse to do that, the Court of Appeals isn't going to look very kindly on you.
He's giving you exactly what you want.
Giving what you need.
Yeah.
So then I was there for about 30 days, right before...
Do you think he was just doing that to just avoid negative press, and that way you couldn't say that you... Who's to say? Yeah, who's to say? I think he... I don't know whether... He must have had some sympathy for me, just to do that. And he actually talked to my lawyer and confirmed that was... That had to have been like a first for you on that, or...
For him.
Yeah.
So anyway, after 30 days, I got orders that they were going to send me to Fort Sam Houston in Texas for medic training. And I had about a week or a few days in between when I was supposed to leave Fort Campbell and get to Fort Sam Houston. It turned out that the Court of Appeals in New York had scheduled their oral argument on my habeas petition, my appeal of the habeas petition denial, right in that interim time period. So I go to New York, I go to this huge courtroom, the 3 judges sitting at a bench.
Looks like it does in the movies, right?
Well, yeah, 3 robed judges. I'm sitting in the back of the courtroom, and my lawyer is arguing that the decision by the district court should be reversed, and the U.S. attorney is arguing for it to be sustained. And at the end, she says, Your Honors, Mr. Donham has orders to go to Fort Sam Houston in just a couple of days. And we know you're going to take some time to rule. we ask that you stay his orders to Fort Sam Houston while you're considering this, while you're considering what you're going to do here. Mm-hmm. And they granted it from the bench.
No, so they just like...
They just said,
okay,
yeah, we agree, we're gonna stay this order. All of a sudden, I was free.
So what does that mean for you?
Well, it meant at the time that I didn't have to go. I was out of the Army for the time being. I moved back to the apartment I was in New York, in Greenwich Village. My wife finished her college, and the Army was ordered to rehear my case. The Army, the judge said, this guy who did your application, he was supposed to be knowledgeable about the conscientious objector law. He didn't have a clue. So the Army's got to redo this. So it wasn't until several months later that I finally heard from the Army, and they had set up a hearing with a guy named Major Don Moore. Mm-hmm. in Fort Hamilton, which is in Brooklyn, New York. So it was totally different. He actually knew the law.
You didn't feel like you were being trapped at that point.
Not at all. He was sympathetic. And as I have learned, since I've been in touch with him since then, he recommended that my application for discharge as a CO be granted, that I actually was a CO.
Huh.
His career was ruined.
For doing so?
For not changing his recommendation. He got phone calls, and I've
That's wild.
Confirmed this with him. In fact, we had lunch with him in his home in near Fairfax, Virginia, just this past fall. He got a call from someone who said, you know, there are people saying that the highest office of the land wants you to change your recommendation.
So I just find it so fascinating that, like, he took a hit for doing what he thought was the right thing to do.
He did.
It's very admirable. It's profound courage.
He probably suffered more than I did from this.
You must have strong feelings for him.
I do. He's a terrific man. We are Facebook friends. He's a very strong member of the Rotary Club. He's obviously retired. He went back in the reserve. He served the Veterans Administration for years as an official. He has a Bronze Star from serving in Vietnam.
Wow, that's amazing.
And he said his letters were steamed open. It's just amazing that he just refused to do what he was ordered to do. He said, I can't do that. That's an illegal order. I'm not going to do it.
And I know you went to law school, too, after that. Talk to me about that. I'm assuming that your experiences brought you there.
Well, yes. I mean, obviously, having gone through a court case, it made me very interested in the law. There was a time when music jobs in Chicago were drying up. I figured I had a friend who was going to law school who was also a musician. I called the law school where he was going, and they said, well, you have to take the LSAT. You know, they're giving one there's one this Saturday. If you take that one and if you pass it, then you could probably be admitted this fall.
Did you study for it?
So I bought a couple of practice tests. I studied for it. I took the practice tests. I took the LSAT, and I scored in the 98th percentile.
Wow, that's impressive.
So I got admitted. I went to night school for 4 years. I I worked at a company that I got a half scholarship, and the other half was paid for by the company that I was working for with a tuition reimbursement program. And I made the dean's list, and I was an editor on Law Review.
Oh, yeah.
So then, when I graduated, I got to be a clerk for a federal magistrate judge in Chicago.
Oh, I bet that was a really neat experience to be on the other side of that, so to speak.
It sure was. And then I joined a firm where I basically was with for 30 years, became a partner, and did commercial litigation.
And that was your career.
And that was my career until 2020, when I retired, and my wife and I moved to Paducah, which we're very glad we did.
So how does it conclude? What's the end of your conscientious objection story? How does all that play out at the end?
In August, at that point in time, I was working for a church in Greenwich Village, the Washington Square Methodist Church, and I lived in an apartment that went with the church. I was considered the youth director. And I got a telegram, probably the first telegram I had ever received. It said, report to Fort Dix, New Jersey, like the next day, to be discharged.
Simple as that.
And then, so I took a bus to Fort Dix, ran into someone that I had known from West Point who had dropped out probably earlier than me. I got my papers. I thought it was going to say, you're discharged as a conscientious objector. Gave me an honorable discharge.
Wow.
No reserve duty.
You didn't have to serve in combat.
I didn't have to serve anywhere.
That's
I
right.
didn't. I was perfectly willing
In a non-combat
to
role.
do alternate service in a hospital or even in the church I was working for, or from some environmental group.
You must have had quite the sigh of relief, if I may say so.
I have to say this. It was, yes, I had a sigh of relief because I was done. Unless the Army appealed to the Supreme Court. But I was I thought, well, why did they do this instead of give me the CO application? Mm-hmm. Because then I felt that would have really justified. You know, I would have been vindicated. Then later I found out that I did have a recommendation, and I did get some. There was a paper that I found through Freedom of Information that was dated later that said, well, he was granted as a CO. It was some memo to the superintendent at West Point. So it worked out that way.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of neat how it all wrapped up very nicely there at the end.
It worked out well for me, yes, in that way, yes.
What would you say was the most surprising part of your journey? What, in terms of the book that you've written and all the experiences that you had, what would you say was the most surprising part of all that? An unexpected thing that happened.
Getting a full honorable discharge was really unexpected. Being in court and, you know, getting ready to go to Texas for medic training, and the judge
just
stopping it right then.
Yeah.
That was unexpected. Mm-hmm. You know, I think those are probably the two most things.
When you got home, did you have any unexpected surprises? Were you met positively by friends and family when you got home?
Well, I never went back home.
Oh, did you not?
I was living in New York. I lived in New York and worked at the church for a couple of years. Then I moved and enrolled in Western Illinois University in Macomb, where my brother was, Mark.
Mark Donham,
Yeah,
the guitar
who was-
player that the community knows. Yeah.
Who was there on a tennis scholarship.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So we moved in there. I lived in Macomb for 5 years. Was getting back into music. Got my undergrad degree. Took some grad courses.
You're a little bit of a piano player yourself too, I know.
Yeah. Became a better piano player. Then after 5 or 6 years there, I moved to Chicago to make a living as a musician. And I did that for 5 years. I played in a house band and a honky tonk where we started at 9 o'clock in the evening and played until 4 in the morning. That was an interesting time.
A little bit different than some West Point time.
It certainly was. It certainly was.
Well, we're about out of time, but
Okay.
I want to thank you so much for talking with me about your book and your story. I mean, what an unexpected turn of events at a time that was very complicated, Vietnam War, and your charge, you're fighting the moral fight for conscientious objectionism is admirable in my view. So thank you very much.
Well, thank
for
you,
talking
Daniel.
with me.
I've enjoyed it, and you were obviously very well prepared for this.
Thank you very much. My guest today was Cary Donham, author of A Wrinkle on the Long Gray Line. Thank you very much for talking with me. Join us next time.